starts with some men in biohazard suits. They leave a strange box and then report to Dr. Goldstein. Dr. Julia Goldstein smiles and says, "We found them," as she watches live footage of a mysterious opening on the ocean floor that resembles a portal. An astrobiologist at Miskatonic University walks into his office and finds Dr. Goldstein waiting for him. Jim wasn't very interested when he heard Julia worked for Pickman Corporation, but when he learned that Pickman Corporation was choosing candidates for an expedition, he started listening. Dr. Goldstein explained that for the past 7 years, they had been researching in the Antarctic and Southern Atlantic Oceans. They had mapped a trench on the Antarctic continental shelf and found the deepest point of the ocean at 37,000 feet. She then showed Jim footage of a portal-like opening on the ocean floor. She explained that the expedition aimed to enter this opening and study what was inside. Jim agreed to join because he was curious about what might be inside the portal-like opening that looked man-made. Jim went to a meeting where he met his new team. Dr. Goldstein started introducing everyone who was attending. Gordon Atkins, who leads the manned submersible lab at London's Royal Society. Christine Harris, a marine biologist from the European Marine Biology Symposium. Joseph Mirror, the safety and communication officer. And Hank O'Connell, the lead engineer for Providence 3, a deep-diving submersible. Providence 3 is built with special foam and can handle the massive pressure at 37,000 feet and below. Christine was worried about the risks of entering the opening, but Dr. Goldstein and Hank assured her that Providence 3 was up to the task and the expedition would be a success. Suddenly, Jed Pickman spoke up from behind the group. He gave a speech about the need to explore the opening, suggesting it might be their greatest discovery. After the meeting, the team shared a meal and got to know each other. They talked about their mission. Christine mentioned how the water pressure was incomprehensible. Gordon kept saying it was too risky. Christine asked why they hadn't changed their minds despite the danger. Everyone agreed that it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. When Christine excused herself, Jim followed to check on her. Christine confessed she knew who Jim was because of her father, who went on an expedition for Pickman Corporation and disappeared after making a significant discovery. She then told Jim about her son Sam, showed him a picture, and expressed her fear that she might not return from the expedition to see her son grow up. 2 months later, the team had completed their training and were ready for the expedition. Pickman decided to join them to see what lay beneath the portal-like opening. Dr. Goldstein checked on everyone as they worked, confirming everything was set. Jim and Christine went down to inspect, while Gordon announced he was opening the vent. Their submersible shook briefly, but then stabilized. Jim prepared to dive into the ocean. Hank reminded him of the procedure and told him he would be alone out there, urging him to remember his training. As they reached the portal, Christine excitedly called Jim to look. Their journey to 37,000 feet below was a success. The team gathered around, astonished by the opening. It appeared man-made, but they were unsure because it was so deep. Gordon carefully maneuvered Providence 3 into the opening when a sudden tremor caused the submersible to shut down. They lost connection with Dr. Goldstein's team on the surface. Christine grew worried as the submersible continued sinking. Suddenly, it started working again as if nothing had happened. Rachel informed them they had lost communication with the surface for 3 hours. The team was shocked because it felt like only minutes had passed. Hank checked their life support and confirmed it had decreased by about 3 hours, raising more suspicion. Ahead of them, they saw a huge ancient ruin. They described the decayed stone structures that looked man-made to Rachel and her team, who couldn't see due to static interference. The sight of these structures caused confusion and suspicion, as it seemed there had been life down there, which seemed impossible given the depth. They noticed something huge and strange on the seabed. Looking closer, they were shocked to see what looked like a life form. Christine said it appeared to be the remains of a creature buried under centuries of sediment. Dr. Goldstein ordered Jim to get closer and take tissue samples using the rover. Jim got ready to go out into the ocean. Christine asked if he would be all right, and he reassured her. As he ventured out, the others kept inspecting from inside Providence 3. Jim approached the organism and took a tissue sample while the others watched. Seeing the organism up close, Jim felt fear because of its massive size. Christine pointed out that it didn't seem to have deteriorated. Joe wondered how long it had been dead. Suddenly, they saw movement on the rover's rear cams. Their radar picked up a massive life form. Christine told Gordon to call Jim back to Providence 3, but Joe insisted they needed the tissue sample. Once Jim finished the incision, Gordon told him to return to the submersible But then they lost the signal. They were all in fear as they saw the colossal organism with wings rise to its full height and let out an inhuman wail. Gordon requested permission to abort, but Dr. Goldstein, desperate for the tissue sample, denied it. Panicking, Gordon handed the controls to Joe, who decided to lower the submersible so Jim could return quickly. Meanwhile, Pickman encountered a silhouette of a non-human creature and declared it an encounter with the gods, exactly what he had hoped for. Christine rushed to the pressure dock and told Hank to fill it with water for Jim's return. When the colossal creature reached out to the submersible, Gordon had to reverse suddenly, causing a tremor that sent Christine into the pressure dock. Before Gordon could open the outer doors to let Jim's rover in, Hank told him to stop as it would blast Christine into the ocean. He opened the inner doors, and Joe helped pull Christine out of the water-filled pressure dock. Once the dock was closed, Jim boarded Providence 3. Joe tried to save Christine, but when she didn't respond, they assumed she had died. Gordon asked what was happening, and Hank told him they had lost her. Hank found Pickman on the ground and tried to wake him. Meanwhile, Gordon struggled to dodge the colossal creature, causing damage to the submersible and letting water in. Hank checked the bunk rooms, found them flooded, and told Gordon to drop weights before the water dragged them down. Since Gordon was still in the pressure dock, he waited 5 seconds before dropping weights. Hank had sealed the corridor but couldn't close the second door, so he couldn't stop the water from coming in or escape himself. He begged Pickman to open the door, but Pickman, talking nonsense, just watched as Hank drowned. Jim returned to Providence 3 and panicked when he saw Christine's lifeless body. He screamed at Joe, asking why he didn't help her. He performed CPR on Christine, ignoring Joe's insistence that she was dead. After a while, Christine coughed up water and Jim embraced her. The submersible successfully left the ancient ruin and headed back to the surface. As they talked, the pressure dock started moving. It was the box with the tissue sample. Pickman wanted the sample taken to the lab. Jim suggested sealing the tissue sample in the pressure lock, fearing it might be dangerous. But Pickman insisted on taking it to the lab. Christine and Jim decided to supervise to ensure the sample stayed contained. As they watched, a slimy tentacle crawled out of the sample. Jim suggested freezing it, and Christine demanded the lab be sealed. Jim led Pickman out of the lab, and Christine covered the glass box with the sample before sealing the lab. Joe called Dr. Goldstein, who warned him that the sample must reach the surface. Dr. Goldstein planned to take the sample for herself, and Joe was part of the plan. Pickman overheard this conversation. After hearing this, Pickman entered the lab, stripped off his clothes, and started rubbing his body with the sample's slime. Meanwhile, Jim and Christine were changing when Jim suddenly became hysterical, revealing that whatever they encountered in the ancient ruin was causing him to hallucinate. Christine held his cheeks, comforting him until he calmed down. As they finished dressing, they heard Gordon scream. Rushing to check, they saw the chaotic state of the open lab. Christine accidentally touched some of the slime and ran back to Jim. Then, Pickman appeared, posing strangely and letting out an inhuman screech before collapsing into the pressure dock. Christine and Jim tried to open the pressure dock to save him, but Joe stopped them at gunpoint. He revealed that Pickman already knew what they were dealing with. Pickman had spent years researching the ancient ruin before their expedition. Their real objective wasn't to explore, but to obtain a living organism sample and profit from it. Christine tried to reason with Joe, explaining that the organism wasn't just physically present, but also had a strange psychological effect on the crew. She told him about her son, and warned him if she did not go back to the surface, he would die with her. Joe refused to listen. Jim told Christine to let Joe go, fearing that agitating him might make the situation more dangerous. Joe returned to the sample and cut off a part of it, placing it in a plastic bag. Meanwhile, Christine and Jim went to find Gordon. As they approached, they heard Gordon retching. When they reached him, they realized he had been affected by the sample. He started talking nonsensically, staring at them strangely. Then, in a voice that sounded exactly like Jim's father, he called Jim son. It became clear that Jim's father had tried to warn Pickman about the opening, but no one listened, leading to his disappearance. Gordon attacked Jim, who struggled to defend himself before being knocked unconscious. Gordon then destroyed everything around him, causing the submersible to malfunction and lose contact with DP control. Christine watched in horror. Joe saw what Gordon did and confronted him. Seeing how deranged Gordon was, Joe fired and killed him. Christine tried to stop Joe, but he told her everything was falling apart and it was all about survival now. Joe planned to take the rover and leave Christine and Jim behind. When Joe turned his back, Christine grabbed an axe and struck Joe's hand, making him drop the gun, which fell beside Jim. Christine fought Joe and eventually stabbed his leg with the axe before running to Jim, who had just woken up. Christine opened the pressure dock and entered the rover, expecting Jim to follow her so they could leave. But Jim grabbed the gun and went to the lab to destroy the tissue sample, ensuring no one else would find it. Meanwhile, Joe regained consciousness and saw a tentacle emerging from Gordon's body. Jim, sticking to his plan, went to the lab to destroy the sample. Before returning to the pressure dock, Jim encountered the silhouette that had possessed Pickman. He hurried back to the pressure dock and told Christine to go without him, explaining that one of them needed to stay behind and seal the pressure dock. Suddenly, Joe appeared, wielding the axe. Jim lured Joe away from the pressure dock and shot him. To his horror, tentacles emerged from Joe's body and Jim shot them before rushing back to the pressure dock. He sealed the pressure dock and opened the outer doors to let Christine out, then slid down the wall, accepting his fate. As everything burned around him, Jim heard his father's voice calling, "Come find me, son!" He approached the silhouette, calling out to his father as the flames consumed the surroundings. 2 days later, Christine woke up in a hospital after escaping from Providence 3. She called out for Jim. Dr. Goldstein explained that they had picked up the rover's signal after losing contact with the submersible and found Christine drifting, bringing her to the hospital. Furious, Christine screamed at Dr. Goldstein for sending her team to their deaths. Suddenly, she felt excruciating pain in her stomach and remembered accidentally touching the tissue sample's slimy fluid. She mockingly congratulated Dr. Goldstein for getting exactly what she wanted before falling back onto the bed, thrashing around and laughing maniacally. Dr. Goldstein and the nurses watched in horror as tentacles burst through Christine's stomach. The movie ends with Christine laughing and screaming while Dr. Goldstein looks on in terror.